Hi everyone, I'm Paige Abbott, and this is your weekly recovery message on the topic of exposure. I wanted to talk about exposure because it's been coming up a lot in my individual appointments with clients, and just noticing the theme that the brain consistently tries to encourage or tempt people to put themselves in situations that are very triggering and not helpful to recovery whatsoever. Yet these are sometimes more subtle than you would think. So I'm not just talking about someone who struggles with addiction involving alcohol, being exposed to alcohol or a bar or a pub type environment, nor am I talking about someone who struggles with addiction involving food and exposure to, baked goods or a bakery or that sort of thing. I'm talking about more subtle ways. So exposure more so to people that trigger a lot of reminders of past, maybe trauma, past pain, shame, exposure to environments or locations that do bring up memories of past trauma or situations that the individual finds very stressful. So it's more subtle and more difficult for the individual to see that their brain is encouraging them to put themselves in a harmful situation. Because it is hard to see, even in reflection, you may have a difficult time identifying what exposure is happening right now that's not helpful for you. As a starting point, however, if you do end up reflecting on this, really pay attention to the feelings and the intensity of feelings. So if you're noticing that there's been some situations or some times over the last few weeks where you had this uprising of quite strong or intense emotion, I would encourage you to backtrack a little bit and look at where you had been, what you had been doing, what sorts of conversations you had been having right around that feeling and that strong intensity of emotion. You may start to see some evidence and some red flags of exposure. So your brain encouraging you to put yourself in situations where it's triggering or harmful for you. As this may be difficult to see, checking it out and talking it through with other people in recovery or professionals who are specialists in addiction would be helpful as well. They may be able to give you some feedback and hear or see things that may be difficult for you to identify. The reason behind this, in terms of how come addiction would even do this in the first place, is just a reminder that addiction is really reliant on intensity of experience. So the more intense something is, the stronger the dopamine release that we receive physiologically. So again, this isn't a personal thing. Your brain doesn't have a personal agenda. It's not out to get you or sabotage you or anything like that. It's just that the brain, especially the brain that has addiction, has become accustomed to looking for those really strong hits of dopamine. And so these are possible to get simply from feeling. So the more intense the exposure, the more intense the feeling. And addiction then gets this strong release of dopamine, or the brain does, and this is what the disease of addiction is looking for and thriving on. So addiction can feed and fuel itself without needing necessarily any external substance ingested or even a behavior engaged in. So exposure can absolutely become a very key part of the disease, particularly as people continue to explore and live in recovery for themselves. So the disease won't just quiet down and stop looking for that dopamine. It will continue to look for it, and the ways and the places in which it finds it can be a little more subtle and a bit more sneaky over time. So I'd really encourage you to reflect on and talk about that idea of exposure and what may be happening in your own life and your own recovery to date, just to keep learning and to keep growing. I wish you the best in your ongoing journey of doing just that, learning and growing. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Bye for now.